Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
It is frustrating.
As the U.S. president once again slaps tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, workers say it's time for Ottawa to mandate Canadian-made steel in projects here.
I think that would be a real strong measure to support Canadian steel producers and Canadian steel workers.
And police shoot and kill a person near a secondary school in Surrey. We'll take you to the scene. Plus,
our hearts and souls are frozen. But at the day like today, we feel warmth.
A BC air ambulance is heading out on a new mission to save Ukrainian lives as the Russian invasion grinds into a third year.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. He did it in his first term in office and is doing it again. U.S. President Donald Trump has officially announced tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports, including those from Canada.
It's 25% without exceptions or exemptions, and that's all countries, no matter where it comes from, all countries.
Both the steel and aluminum sectors in Canada are highly dependent on the U.S. market, and Canada has been the single largest supplier of aluminum to the U.S. Australia's Prime Minister, meanwhile, says Trump has agreed to consider an exemption for steel tariffs on his country. The latest tariff announcement came as a surprise on Sunday, and as Katie DeRosa reports, BC's steel and aluminum industries are scrambling to respond.
Canada's temporary reprieve from tariffs was short-lived. U.S. President Donald Trump says he plans to slap 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports entering the U.S., a move that will hit Canada, one of the U.S.'s major suppliers, hard.
It is frustrating for everyone. The uncertainty that's created by these random comments without clear understanding of what's coming is a real challenge.
BC's only aluminum smelter is run by Rio Tinto's Alcan facility in Kitimat, which employs 1,500 people. It produces more than 400,000 tons a year, which is about 14% of Canada's total output. Ravi Kahlon says Premier David Eby has met with executives from Rio Tinto, and the company is working to sell their products to other markets. The United Steelworkers lead researcher on the tariff file wants to see the federal government implement a Buy Canadian policy to reduce our dependence on the U.S.
I think the federal government can do quite a bit in that regard in mandating the use or encouraging the use of Canadian-made steel in public infrastructure projects. And I think that would be a real strong measure to support Canadian steel producers and Canadian steel workers.
Canada's steel and aluminum industries have been here before. Trump imposed tariffs on Canada in 2018 during his first term, 25% for steel and 10% for aluminum. Canada responded with counter tariffs on U.S. products like Florida orange juice. The Steelworkers Union said the result was 800 job losses across the country. Later that year, Canada, the U.S., and Mexico came to a trade agreement that replaced NAFTA, and by 2019, the tariffs were dropped. Kahlon says BC has no plans to implement retaliatory tariffs for now. Premier David Eby leaves Monday night for Washington, D.C. He's part of a delegation of Canada's 13 premiers who will meet with key members of the Trump administration, Congress members, and business leaders and make the case against tariffs. Katie DeRosa, CBC News, Victoria.
Police in Surrey have shot and killed a person near a secondary school. It happened over the weekend. The CBC's Rafferty Baker is at the scene. Rafferty, what more do we know?
This is where the shooting happened Sunday afternoon, 185 Street and 70 Avenue. A memorial has been built here. People have been coming by to drop off flowers, stuffed animals, and even a little Hot Wheels car. Now, the Independent Investigations Office says the incident began 2 or 3 blocks away at Clayton Heights Secondary School. Officers say they were responding to a call about a person with a gun. What we now know is that about half an hour later, police followed a person to this corner. CBC News has viewed footage from a nearby doorbell surveillance camera. It shows a person walking across the yard here, pointing what appears to be a handgun at his head. You can hear police shouting and asking the person not to harm himself. At one point, the person turns and points what appears to be a handgun in the direction of the officers before continuing to move behind a bush out of the camera's view. The footage shows two officers taking cover behind an RCMP SUV. You can hear what sounds like two gunshots in quick succession before several officers rush into the frame toward the person. Neighbors also describe hearing two gunshots, one of which appears to have struck a home on the corner. The IIO is now looking into this shooting, but not saying much about the victim or what led to the gunfire. Students at Clayton Heights Secondary School tell CBC News the victim was a grade 10 student there. The school put out a statement confirming that a student there had died over the weekend, but did not explicitly link it to the police shooting. Rafferty Baker, CBC News, Surrey.
Travel agencies across this country are reporting that hundreds of Canadians are canceling trips to the U.S., fighting a potential trade war by taking their business elsewhere. And as Michelle Gassoub explains, the U.S. tourism sector is warning that that could threaten tens of thousands of American jobs.
But when I travel, I'll be telling people I'm from Canada.
A surge in Canadian pride brought on by a potential looming trade war with the U.S.
I don't like his politics, the way that he's treating Canadian people or Canada.
It's not just a war of words. This travel agent says Canadians are canceling trips to the U.S. in droves.
But this time definitely feels different. This has been a much more tangible reaction from clients who are actually outright canceling trips.
The potential dollar impact of those cancellations is big. According to the U.S. Travel Association, a 10% dip in inbound travel from Canada could translate to $2.1 billion in lost spending and jeopardize 140,000 American jobs.
In most destinations in the U.S., Canada is the #1 international market. So looking at places like Las Vegas, Palm Springs, Orlando, Phoenix, a lot of those Sunbelt destinations are going to be hit really hard.
Those in the travel industry say the weak Canadian dollar was already impacting U.S. travel. The economic threats have many Canadians saying anywhere but the U.S.
Canadians are taking a stand in solidarity. They're showing Americans, or rather the U.S. administration, where they're going to spend their tourism dollars.
So far, it's hard to put a figure on how many trips have been canceled. Data from Statistics Canada and the U.S. Bureau of Transportation don't yet reflect the last 2 weeks. But the message in the travel industry is clear.
When I've been speaking to some of our customers, what I'm hearing a lot is trust. The trust has been broken. I think that's just the same word that I keep hearing over and over again. And they're just not feeling safe to travel there right now.
Canadians staying close to home in the face of so much uncertainty. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
A BC helicopter company is donating a valuable piece of equipment to Ukraine as the Russian invasion grinds on. As Pinky Wong shows us, the gift is a full circle moment for those it's meant to help.
Even if this helicopter is going to save one life, this is worth to do because human life is priceless.
It's a welcome gift after a brutal invasion. Ukrainian non-profit groups are celebrating HeliJet's donation of this medical helicopter. It flew as a backup air ambulance in BC. HeliJet says it still can fly for years to come, so now it will airlift Ukrainians in need as part of a humanitarian fleet. The head of HeliJet says a very personal connection kick-started the gift.
We supported the Ukrainian family that we house at our home. We just felt it was the right thing to do to see if we could support it in a bigger way. And eventually, this came the culmination of giving an aircraft that can support, wounded soldiers.
Ukrainian representatives say the donation is a full circle moment.
With Igor Sikorsky design helicopter, and Igor Sikorsky was born in Ukraine, in Kyiv. And this aircraft is going back home to save lives.
And they say it's much needed, almost 3 years into Russia's invasion.
This unprecedented donation of a Sikorsky medevac helicopter stands as a powerful reminder that Ukraine has not been forgotten. This vital air ambulance will transform the landscape of medical evacuation services for those affected in the war-ravaged areas of Ukraine.
The Ukrainian pilots and engineers who will fly and maintain it were trained in Richmond. The chopper will be shipped to Kyiv by the end of this month before its life-saving missions begin.
Our hearts and souls are frozen. But at the day like today, we feel warmth.
Pinky Wong, CBC News, Vancouver.
The federal government says it is pledging millions of dollars for affordable housing energy upgrades across Vancouver. Liberal MP Joyce Murray says there will be about $16 million from Ottawa's Canada Greener Affordable Housing Program. Seniors housing provider Calling Ministries says the money will offset the cost of heat pumps, double-pane windows, and new roofs at its various properties on the west side.
In order to retain current levels of high affordability, on this site we have some of the most affordable rents on the west side, and keep our seniors in place, particularly while we do this renovation. We need grant funding assistance to offset the high capital costs of renovating.
Around 420 affordable homes in the city are getting federal funding to improve their energy efficiency. Well, the total cost for policing the 3 nights of Taylor Swift's Eras Tour here in Vancouver in December has come to more than $940,000. Police say it paid for $470,000 of that, and BC Police picked up the rest. The VPD deployed 700 officers inside and outside the stadium area, anticipating there could be 250,000 people around. The force says it estimates the Eras Tour had a $157 million impact to Vancouver's economy. Bus drivers in the Cowichan Valley on Vancouver Island are on day 3 of job action. The strike is impacting more than a dozen routes in communities like Duncan, where, as Claire Palmer reports, people who rely on transit say they're already feeling the impact.
Here, Kubra Panazadef and her family stands, waiting for a bus that will never arrive.
I heard the news yesterday. I don't know what we will do.
She says she's lived in Duncan for a year and relies on transit to get around.
I think it's a big problem, yeah, of course, like how we will bring our groceries, how we will go to reach the hospital, and how we can go to shopping or everywhere else, yeah. It's not that easy.
Nearby, dozens of transit operators have set up a picket line outside the bus depot. They say they're fighting for better wages, more breaks, and access to sanitary facilities during their shifts. Sean Bunpal is one of the striking bus drivers. He says workers like him want their wages on par with other transit operators on the island.
The issues stem off of the wage discrepancies between us and obviously BC Transit and Victoria, and these gaps have continued to grow over the years.
More than 50 workers in the Cowichan Valley walked off the job on Saturday after talks broke down with their employer, Transdev. The strike affects more than a dozen routes in communities like Duncan, Lake Cowichan, Chemainus, and Crofton, and service to and from Victoria. Michelle DeVries has been working the Cowichan routes for almost 3 years and says it's tough to live these days on what she's currently making.
For a one-bedroom apartment is $1,800, $1,900, $2,000 a month, right? So that's more than half of my income.
Volker Mann is 64 years old. He's worked as a bus driver for 16 years in the valley. He's ready to retire, but says that doesn't seem possible now.
I thought I could retire with dignity here, but there's no such thing or no such way because there is no proper pension plan. We don't have a municipal pension plan. We don't. There's no chance that I see in the near future of ever retiring. So I'm basically just working till I die.
Transdev says the two parties had a, quote, productive dialogue on Friday, but still remain far apart. The union says they'll be back at the bargaining table early this week. Claire Palmer, CBC News, Duncan.
Darius Madavi is here for the look at the weather, and it's just cold.
It's just cold. Yeah, that's it. This is pretty much across the province. Up in the Peace, we might see some flurries tomorrow and some snow on Wednesday. But other than that, Arctic outflow warnings up and down the coast. That high pressure over the province trying to escape out. So those Arctic outflow warnings in place. Also some extreme cold over in the Rockies. But we saw some flurries this morning across parts of the south coast around Nanaimo and up the east coast of the island. But besides that, nothing really in sight. We've got sunny skies and very cold weather over the next couple days, and that pattern shift comes towards the end of this week. We'll talk more about those temperatures later in the show, Dan.
Sounds good. Still to come, advocates who support survivors of intimate partner violence in BC say stigma keeps many Black women silent. More on that story after this. A contentious supportive housing project in Richmond is back on track. The 6-story, 90-unit development at Canby and Sexsmith was paused just before last year's provincial election because of significant community opposition in the summer. The province says it looked at 5 alternate sites and eventually decided the original location is still the best option. One Richmond City Councillor, meanwhile, says they have not seen any evidence of a rise in crime near other supportive housing complexes in the city.
I think that the housing is really important, but I do think that the province needs to look at how they're running these places, because if there's open drug use and dealers in the hallways, and then how is somebody who wants to get off of drugs able to, move on and not have their recovery be in jeopardy?
Galanders adds the city hasn't heard from the province yet about how the supportive housing residents will be integrated into the community safely. Advocates who support survivors of intimate partner violence in BC are trying to reduce stigma among Black women. They say many Black survivors do not feel comfortable coming forward to friends or family. As Yasmin Khanea explains, organizations are now working to break the silence.
Leslie Ann Paris tears up, remembering her past relationships.
I didn't really think too much about it. Like all the red flags that you see now that are more apparent, I didn't see any of that.
She says she was in a vulnerable place, and after escaping one abusive relationship, she jumped into another.
Our relationship was just like constant, like fighting all the time. Doors were broken. There was one fight that got really bad, and he ended up punching me in my jaw. And yeah, within a month, like I knew that what had happened was wrong and like I needed to get out of there.
While there's limited data in Canada on Black survivors of intimate partner violence, Statistics Canada says Black women face some of the highest domestic violence rates among minority groups, 42% compared to 29% of ethnic minorities. In the U.S., Black women are more than twice as likely than white women to be killed by an intimate partner. Paris says she was ashamed to talk to her mom about abuse because as a Black woman, she felt she always had to put on a brave face.
I don't want her to see me like weak or anything like that. Like I should be strong in these situations.
Advocates say many Black survivors feel that way.
A lot of people just think that we can just take everything, and that's just not true. Everybody has a breaking point.
In a world that often overlooks our pain,
Black Women Connect Vancouver and Battered Women's Support Services have launched an awareness campaign, encouraging survivors to break the silence.
I was assaulted, and for so long, I felt like I couldn't tell anyone. But here, I found strength.
Black Women Connect Vancouver holds yoga classes and other events specifically for Black women to help create a safe space.
So many times, especially as Black women, and people don't hear us, they don't see us. So being able to come together is just really important for us to find healing.
Paris, now a wellness guide, leading meditation sessions and sound baths for survivors, says she's gone on a long healing journey.
It took years. I still was bouncing in and out of relationships for a really long time, and I hurt a lot of people along the way as well.
She says she's now in a healthy relationship and hopes all survivors can heal. Yasmin Khanea, CBC News, Vancouver.
A rather rare sight for people on the west coast of Vancouver Island. Tofino got a dusting of snow. Cool, crisp weather is meant to stick around, but there is some kind of change coming. Darius will explain in your BC-wide forecast coming up.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and this is your CBC Inbox.
Canada's biggest night in music is coming to Vancouver, and we want you to be there. The Juno Awards will be hosted by BC's own Michael Bublé, live from Rogers Arena on Sunday, March 30th. The evening features live performances by Juno-nominated artists, including a special award presentation to rock band Sum 41. Tickets on sale now at cbcmusic.ca/Junos.
Back to one of our top stories now. Canada is the single largest supplier of aluminum to the United States, and much of that is exported from Quebec. So there is a lot of concern in that province now that Donald Trump has once again imposed tariffs on aluminum and steel. Kwabena Oduro has more from workers and a company that uses aluminum in their manufacturing.
I'm inside one of the aluminum manufacturers in Saint-Julie, Quebec, where they make the lighting posts, the traffic light poles, and the structures that hold signs on bridges here. I spoke to some of the employees who are working here, and they say ever since the tariffs have become a topic of conversation, there has been a lot of uncertainty, and some are really worried about their job because this is how they provide for their families.
At the beginning, I was a little bit scared because I wasn't sure what's going to happen with my job. Because at the end of the day, it's the way that I provide food for my wife, for my kid, for myself also. So I mean, it will make me feel bad, of course.
Aluminum is a key resource in Quebec. It's the second largest industry, and the United States is Quebec's largest partner when we're talking about aluminum. About 2/3 of aluminum that goes into the U.S. comes from Quebec. And in Canada, 8 out of 9 of the Canadian aluminum smelters are right here in Quebec. And at this company, Alu MC3, they say that about 30 to 40% of the production is done with the U.S. So if tariffs are imposed and there are counter tariffs, that could mean double trouble.
A lot of the extrusion company, which is our raw material, aluminum tubes, they bring in aluminum billets produced here in Canada. So when they bring it into the U.S., it's a 25% tariff, and then we would buy these extrusions, and then another 25% tariff would be added on top of that. So this would create a lot of inflation in our prices.
Aluminum businesses like this one are now in the process of expanding to the rest of Canada. They say this will keep jobs here, and it will ease the worry on employees while keeping aluminum businesses thriving in Canada. Kwabena Oduro, CBC News, Saint-Julie, Quebec.
Now even more talk tonight from Donald Trump about his vision of Canada as the 51st state and the benefit he says that will be for Canadians. Marina von Stackelberg shows us how Trump could try to force that and how Canadians are pushing back.
At Iqaluit's airport, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says Trump's aggression is a wake-up call.
Our military is weakened and our allies no longer respect us.
Poilievre says the Liberal government has failed to properly protect Canada's Arctic. If elected, he says the Conservatives would build a permanent military base in Iqaluit, hire 2,000 more Canadian Rangers to patrol the most remote parts of the country, and purchase 2 armed icebreakers for the Navy.
If we are to be a sovereign, self-reliant nation, we must take control of our north, secure all of our borders, and stand on our own 2 feet. We cannot count on the Americans to do it for us anymore.
China and Russia have long been seen as a threat to our northern sovereignty. But now the U.S. president muses almost daily about taking over all of Canada, in part because of our lack of defense.
You know, they don't pay very much for military, and the reason they don't pay much is they assume that we're going to protect them. That's not an assumption they can make, because why are we protecting another country?
Countries don't have friends. They have interests. They don't have friends.
This expert warns Trump would not have to send in troops to take control of Canada.
The reality is you can do it by crippling the economic capabilities of your neighbor and therefore placing them in what could be, politely referred to as a vassal state.
Canadian officials maintain it's in the Americans' interest to keep protecting us.
If you don't defend Canada, you cannot have an effective defense for the U.S. We are all together.
It's a sentiment politicians here have long counted on, that Canada and the U.S. are natural allies with common interests, and our friend and neighbor to the south wouldn't pick a fight with us. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
The Israel-Hamas ceasefire is at risk. Hamas says it won't release the next round of hostages as planned, claiming Israel has broken the deal. As Chris Brown shows us, Donald Trump's audacious plan for Gaza is not helping either.
Ever in peril, the 3-week-old ceasefire in Gaza may now be in real trouble after Hamas said the next release of hostages set for Saturday would not happen.
They all need to come home now.
In a statement, Hamas accused Israel of violations by targeting returnees to northern Gaza with shelling and gunfire and failing to allow the entry of all forms of humanitarian aid as agreed upon. More than 1 million people in Gaza are sleeping outside in tents in awful conditions, and Hamas has said it wants better shelters and generators to produce heat.
Real estate development.
Donald Trump's comments have also infuriated Palestinians. In an interview with Fox News, he doubled down on the idea of expelling them from Gaza, clarifying that after they leave, they won't be allowed back.
Would the Palestinians have the right to return? Spent. No, they wouldn't, because they're going to have much better housing.
16 Israelis have been freed during this ceasefire, including this past weekend. But the fate of more than 35 other living hostages now appears in jeopardy. The men released Saturday looked gaunt and frail, prompting fierce exchanges in Israel's Knesset even before Hamas's announcement, with opposition members saying while the hostages were taken from their homes by Hamas, it's Netanyahu who's killing them.
In the worst case,
as mediators try to find solutions, this analyst fears Trump's day-after scenario for Gaza has undercut the negotiations.
If Trump continues to message the way that he is, in an unfocused way with fantastical ideas that have no connection to reality, you're going to see a return to violence.
Over 48,000 Gazans have been killed since the start of the war, but well-armed Hamas militants have attempted to show they are still in control and prepared to fight. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
Aches and pains are one reason to book an appointment with your family doctor if you have one. But what about your mental health? That still carries stigma for many people, despite efforts to end that stigma. It doesn't have to, though. CBC medical columnist Dr. Melissa Lem is here to shed some light on how patients can start addressing mental health issues in their GP's office. Dr. Lem, always good to see you. What is your role as a family doctor when someone perhaps suspects that they have a mental health issue or that you suspect that they have one?
We play a really key role in public health care as family doctors. So, for example, a lot of mental health care starts and continues in our family doctor's office. So when we know that about 40% of those family doctor visits actually happen because of mental health concerns, and we also prescribe close to 50% of all pharmaceuticals for mental health. And one of the reasons is because we play a very specific part in the healthcare system, and a special part. We are able to diagnose and treat both mental and physical health conditions, and we know there's a lot of interplay between the two. Also, we have longitudinal relationships with our patients, so we bring knowledge of the whole patient to each encounter, and patients trust us. So when they're opening up about their mental health concerns, it's easier for them, and also when we come up with treatment plans together, it's easier for them and more likely for them to follow them.
Mm-hmm. If they don't bring it up and you have a suspicion, how do you broach that topic?
I want to let patients know that the easiest way for them to interact with their family doctor around it is to be open and honest. And it also is important for us to be the same with our patients. And I think that begins, in fact, when the patient books their appointment. So just say right up front, I'm booking it for a mental health condition or depression or anxiety, so that we are prepared to have that conversation with them. And I think this is a concern, this is an issue we should bring up when we do general health screens, like at physical exams, for example, or annual physicals. Bring up mental health as another vital sign.
Mm-hmm. There has been a lot of effort through various initiatives from doctors and other healthcare professionals and organizations to deal with the stigma of mental health. How do you think we're doing with that? Are we making a difference?
I think there has been some improvement over the last few years, certainly, and stigma does exist, though. It still does exist because of misinformation and lack of information, and there are a number of kinds of stigma. So there is public stigma because of historical and cultural factors. There's self-stigma because of internalized shame around not wanting to disclose your condition, and then structural stigma. And one example of this is within the healthcare system where, for example, psychotherapy is not covered by the public healthcare system. We have other countries like the UK and Australia and Germany where it is. So So if we can provide more public coverage for things like psychotherapy, that could help destigmatize it and also make it more accessible to patients.
And lastly, if someone suspects they have a problem, they're not, and if they don't have a GP, what is another option for them? Is there a number they can call?
There is a provincial hotline. It's 310-6789, which you can contact for both kind of urgent and less urgent mental health issues, and they'll connect you to different resources and talk to you. And there are a number of other hotlines and online chats, in fact, available for different groups like youth, Indigenous peoples, elders, and people who use substances, so you can get more tailored care. Even if you don't have a family doctor, there is help available.
Dr. Melissa Lim, we always appreciate your time and your expertise. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Dan.
Now, this topic can be upsetting for some, and here's some more information. If you need help, you can reach the BC Crisis Centre. It is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The number is 1-800-784-2433. That is 1-800-SUICIDE. They offer help in more than 140 languages, and in BC, you can also call 310-6789. Should you or shouldn't you? New data out of the UK answers some of your EV, car, and battery life questions. You'll want to stick around for this. A new blockbuster in theaters is tackling a familiar premise, a human-like robot that goes bad. Magda Gabriela looks at the Hollywood appeal and whether those robots are still just fiction.
Companion is a romantic thriller with a human-like robot. It's the latest in a long list of bots on the big screen. And now humanoids are appearing in real life too.
Robots and AI that are indistinguishable from humans.
Aria, the AI-equipped humanoid, was at this electronics show in Las Vegas in January. The Canadian tech company that made her sold about a dozen like her so far.
They're really there to act as a companion. Maybe they can work for you as a concierge, a greeter at a retail store.
In North Bay, Ontario, humanoids of a different kind have popped up too.
Hi, Henry.
Canadore College is running a social robots program to interact with seniors.
I think that's a good way of, learning stuff.
Now, older adults like Henry are being trained to take the robots out into the community.
Our older adults live a very real experience of being isolated and lonely. So to have a robot operated by a human being as a way to engage with them, I think there's nothing wrong with that.
This academic studies the pros and cons of human-robot relationships. She says privacy is a consideration with the microphone and camera-equipped robots. But on the plus side is a benefit to brain health.
For children experiencing stressful situations, for families, for older adults in various living arrangements, we're seeing a lot of benefit.
But Hollywood paints a darker picture. For decades, deathbots from the Terminator to Megan have lit up screens. In reality, it's not robots we should fear, says this expert.
Need to be scared only if the person who programmed them to do something very specific that is bad.
Shut her down already. Good or bad, he says we're still decades away from humanoids walking among us. Magda Gabriela, CBC News, Toronto.
Darius Madavi is here with his BC-wide weather forecast, and temperatures, at least on the south coast, are going to inch up a bit?
Yes, slowly but surely across southern BC, temperatures coming up. Northern BC, they inch up a little bit and then they fall back down again. So let's take a look. Over the next couple days, you can see those highs. Not much change tomorrow, but as we get into Thursday and the end of the week, temperatures slowly coming up. By the weekend, we should be close to, but not quite at seasonal. Normally, Metro Vancouver or Vancouver by the water, the airport, usually around 8 degrees this time of year. We're probably going to reach around 6 degrees by the weekend, so getting close to there. But if we take a look at the wind chill highs instead, you'll notice quite a bit lower. Again, these are the high temperatures that we're expecting to see over the next few days. So that's what it's still going to be feeling chilly. For sure over the next few days. Let's take a look, zooming out to the rest of the province. I'm going to talk briefly about precipitation before we circle back to temperatures, because there's not really much to say. The piece may see some flurries tomorrow. I think this model maybe undersells that a little bit. Some more snow may come to parts of the northeast as we get into Wednesday. And then we start to see a pattern shift. You can see a little bit more cloud moving in across BC. Nothing crazy in terms of precipitation, at least for the weekdays, but here on the south coast, or really anywhere. But again, it's an indication that things might be starting to shift as we head into the weekend and maybe start to see some more flurries and that sort of thing. In terms of our highs over the next couple days, again, across the province, we're seeing them come up a little bit before they fall once again, especially up in the northeast as we get into the end of the week. In terms of the wind chill values, I want to talk about the lows here as well. Here we're looking at the actual temperatures in addition to the wind chill. You'll notice not much difference down in the south coast because this model does undersell it a little bit. I think it will be a little bit more than that. But the wind's really making it feel colder in places like the northeast and some parts of the southern interior, the southeast as well. So some very notable temperatures, definitely, like there up in Fort St. John. Let's take a look briefly at the conditions across the province tomorrow. Lots of sunshine spreading across the region, and again, some snow coming to the piece. I'd say a relatively light amount, but probably going to see some flurries there. And if we zoom in to Metro Vancouver, we can talk a little bit about what the wind chill values will actually be here. Again, that model underselling it a bit, but feeling like -12 tomorrow morning, feel like -9 on Wednesday. And then we start to see that pattern shift into the end of the week, Dan.
Okay, Darius, thanks so much. We're just going to jump to Premier David Eby speaking at YVR ahead of his trip to Washington.
American families as well. These tariffs, even just the tariffs announced today, are going to increase the cost of so many things for Americans. Everything from cars to airplanes. and it doesn't have to be this way. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions that you have.
We understand that you've had some discussions with Rio Tinto, and we're wondering, what was said and what other markets could BC be moving to?
Okay. We're really proud of the smelter that's up in Kitimat. It's the lowest carbon aluminum in North America. Runs on electricity, and it's an amazing product that they make there. It's in demand around the world. Just like so many critical minerals and metals that are produced here in British Columbia, you can't replace them anywhere else. For the Americans, we know that they can only produce about 1.5 million tons of aluminum. And their demand for aluminum is more than 5 million tons a year. So that additional aluminum has to come from somewhere else. And that means that the announcement today means the Americans are paying 25% more for aluminum that they have to bring in. They're taxing themselves. They're going to have to buy it from us, or they'll have to buy it from someone else, and it will all be subject to the tariff. We're very fortunate here in British Columbia to have access to the Pacific Ocean, to ports. It is a big headache for BC mining companies, for smelting companies like Teck, like Rio Tinto. But I have confidence in the products we produce, in our amazing ports here, and the ability to get these global commodities onto the water and to buyers around the world. There is demand for it. People need what we produce here in BC, and Rio Tinto and Teck and others are forced into looking for other partners potentially, or just selling their aluminum at a higher price to Americans. None of it makes sense to me, and I'll be trying to take that message to the Americans in Washington, D.C. Okay. So the meetings that we're attending have been organized in partnership with the Council of Federation, which is the group of all of the premiers across Canada. We're meeting with decision makers in government, both Republicans and Democrats, elected officials, as well as business leadership. And very grateful to the work of the Canadian ambassador for pulling together different businesses with strong Canadian interests south of the border to have these important conversations. We'll also be meeting with organized labor leaders south of the border, underlining how for their members, their jobs and the costs of daily life for them, whether it's fuel or electricity or homes or pasta, are going to be going up because of these tariffs.
That is Premier David Eby at YVR as he prepares to head to Washington on a trade mission, talking about the fact that the United States, U.S. President Donald Trump has just imposed 25% tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, as well as from other countries. Australia saying it might get an exemption, though the president said that other countries would not. He says he'll be meeting with Democratic leadership and organized labor, as well as business leaders. The world's best facing off for the first time in quite a while. Why the NHL is putting on a 4-nation tournament. What we might see and why the battle on ice could be extra spicy. Next.
Until now, there's been very little data to support any manufacturer claims about an EV car's lifespan and battery longevity, but new data out of the UK can answer at least one of those questions. The CBC's Johanna Wagstaff has more.
Do EVs last as long as gas cars? A new study looked at nearly 30 million cars, and they say the answer is yes. UK researchers wanted to look at the roadworthiness of electric vehicles versus gas and diesel. Enter the UK Ministry of Transport. Turns out in the UK, you have to take your car in for a roadworthiness test every year once it hits 3 years. So researchers were able to see the life story of 29.8 million unique vehicles. When a vehicle stopped showing up for these tests after 18 months, they deemed them dead for all intents and purposes. All of this data shows that the median lifespan for EVs is about 18.4 years. That's a full year and a half more than diesel cars and only slightly less than gasoline ones. But even with similar lifespans, the EVs had higher mileage, about 13,000 kilometers more than the gasoline ones. Their conclusion? The longevity of EVs does rival gas and diesel. But wait, I know what some of you are thinking. What about the lifespan of the batteries themselves? Because right now the standard warranty for EV batteries is only 8 years. Here's the thing. Recent studies testing those batteries in laboratories have found they last much longer, still usable even after 20 years. It's just been hard to get the data about the life cycle of the battery in the car until now. We asked the study authors if they accounted for battery replacement. They said the focus was overall longevity of the car, but to truly see how long an EV could live for, affordable and secondhand batteries will need to be a big part of the future. Ultimately, there's a lot to consider when comparing EVs to gas and diesel. For a lot of Canadians, it comes down to costs, access to charging sites, and range. A trend cities are picking up on.
And concerns around range anxiety is probably sort of the number one concern we see from folks in the public that are considering an electric vehicle and wanting to make sure it will work for their day-to-day and month-to-month and year-to-year needs.
We also know that building electric cars produces more CO2 than conventional ones because they rely so much on mining. But that's why a study on longevity is such an important part of the EV big picture. If EVs last long enough, despite the extra cost of mining, they can still be a net positive for the environment.
It was pretty encouraging to me. I think if you go back, was it 2007, was there sort of their first cohort of vehicles? If you bought an EV then, according to that data, you might have had a less total kilometers and less lifespan out of that vehicle, which is not what we want. But the newer ones, 2017, 2018, that they've looked at, if you bought one of those electric vehicles, good chance it'll last longer than a comparable combustion engine vehicle, and that you'll be able to drive it further.
Not to mention what this means for secondhand EVs. Now, maybe a 5 or 10-year-old EV has a whole life ahead of it, and down the road, a 20-year-old one is giving my Echo a run for its money. Bottom line, any car, gas or electric, that isn't ending up in the junkyard after 15 years, that's a good thing.
Well, it's got hockey fans very excited. Starting this week, Montreal and Boston will play host to the Four Nations Faceoff.
Douglas Gelevin has more on the big tournament and why it's making history.
Montreal is co-hosting the Four Nations Face-Off. It's an international best-on-best competition involving Canada, the USA, Finland, and Sweden. And while it only involves 4 countries, fans are anxiously awaiting the start of this one. Not only because it's going to be great hockey, but also because it's been a long while since Canada put its best players on the ice together.
Passes off, he shoots, he scores, Brad Marchand!
It was 9 years ago at the World Cup of Hockey in 2016. So what's behind this nearly decade-long hiatus? Well, unlike sports like soccer, which have the World Cup and things like the Euro and Copa happening every couple of years, hockey has never really had an international steady schedule of best-on-best competition. There is, of course, the Olympics, but you have to go back to 2014 in Sochi to find the last time that Canada had its best out there. After a falling out with the International Ice Hockey Federation, the NHL didn't allow its players to participate in 2018 or 2022.
Canada wins the World Cup.
And that 2016 World Cup, it was organized by the NHL itself, but the league hasn't held anything like it since. Until now, with the Four Nations Face-Off. Gary Bettman and the NHL have made nice with the IIHF, and this is seen as a bit of a gear-up for the return of NHL players to the Olympic Games in Italy next winter. Now, Montreal's been the site of a few memorable moments for Team Canada in the past.
There's the official face-off.
In the 70s, Game 1 of the 72 Summit Series was here. That was a 7-3 loss. There was also the deciding game of the 1976 Canada Cup, where the home team won the tournament with a dramatic overtime goal over Czechoslovakia. There's also been some big showdowns with the USA in this building, which was constructed in 1996.
For sure, this is done now.
In 96, the USA stunned Canada, winning back-to-back games to take the 96 World Cup. There was also the opening game of the 2004 World Cup. That time, Canada beat the US 2-1. The Four Nations face-off is being split between here and in Boston, and given the recent trade tensions and tariff tensions between Canada and the United States, on top of the return of international best-on-best hockey, these games could be extra spicy. Douglas Gellivan, CBC News, Montreal.
Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. We'll have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. Have a good night.